The galactic trade station buzzed with activity as ships from dozens of worlds docked and departed in the endless dance of interstellar commerce. Among the sleek vessels with their energy shields and plasma drives, one ship stood out like a relic from another age. The human cargo freighter, Persistence, looked ancient compared to the crystalline Etherian cruisers and the biomechanical Zephyrian transports. Captain Sarah Chen walked through the station's main marketplace, her worn leather jacket and simple utility belt marking her as obviously human. The other species gave her a wide berth, their conversation switching to hushed tones as she passed. Humans were still new to galactic society, having joined the Confederation only 50 years ago. Most aliens viewed them as primitive backwater dwellers who had stumbled into space travel through sheer luck. At her hip hung an object that drew particular attention and barely concealed amusement from the other traders. It was a revolver, its steel barrel worn smooth from decades of use, the wooden grip polished by countless hands. To the aliens with their plasma weapons and neural disruptors, it looked like something from a museum. "Look at the primitive!" chittered Vextar, a mantis-like clicking trader, his forearms gesturing dramatically to his companions. "She carries a chemical projectile launcher. How quaint!" His friends erupted in their species equivalent of laughter, a sound like breaking glass. The clickings were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced weaponry, each soldier equipped with bioadaptive plasma rifles that could adjust their output based on target analysis. Sarah ignored the comments and continued toward the weapons merchant district. She needed ammunition for her sidearm, and the station's human quarter was too small to stock what she required. The old .357 rounds were becoming harder to find as humans increasingly adopted galactic standard weapons. The weapons bazaar stretched across 3 levels of the station, filled with displays of exotic armaments. Crystalline energy swords hummed with contained power, neural scramblers promised to disable enemies without permanent harm, and gravity manipulators could crush a target from the inside out. Sarah walked past them all, drawing stares and whispered comments. "Attention primitives and backward species," announced a booming voice through the bazaar's speakers. "Today only, Keldara's premium armaments offers trade-in values for your obsolete weapons. Bring in your chemical launchers, metal blades, and kinetic projectiles for immediate credit toward proper galactic standard equipment." The announcement was clearly aimed at humans, though it tried to maintain diplomatic language. Several alien traders turned to look at Sarah expectantly, as if waiting for her to rush toward the trade-in counter. Instead, she approached a small booth run by an elderly Thurian, one of the few species that showed humans any respect. Thurians resembled tall, thin bears with silver fur and wise amber eyes. They had been among the first to welcome humans into the galactic community. "Captain Chen," rumbled Tor-On, the Thurian merchant, his voice deep and warm. "I have what you seek, though I must warn you these may be the last 357 rounds I can acquire. The manufacturers are discontinuing production." "I appreciate you keeping some in stock, Tor-On," Sarah replied, accepting the small box of ammunition. "I know most people think I'm being stubborn, but this old gun has saved my life more times than I can count." The Thurian's amber eyes crinkled with something like understanding. "The young races always assume newer means better. We Thurians learned long ago that sometimes the old ways persist because they work." As Sarah completed her purchase, she became aware of a growing commotion nearby. A group of Etherian merchants were backing away from something, their translucent blue faces showing alarm. The Etherians were considered one of the most advanced species in the galaxy, masters of energy manipulation and quantum technology. Through their ranks pushed 3 figures that made Sarah's blood run cold. Void Hunters. The galaxy's most feared pirates, though calling them pirates didn't capture the full horror of what they were. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies a mixture of cybernetic implants and genetically modified flesh. Where faces should have been, sensor arrays and targeting systems gleamed with malevolent red light. Void hunters didn't just steal cargo. They consumed entire ships, breaking them down for raw materials while the crews were still alive. They had been the nightmare of space travel for over 1,000 years, and no species had ever found an effective way to stop them. "This station is now under Void Hunter control," announced the lead figure, its voice a mechanical rasp that echoed through speakers embedded in its throat. "All beings will submit to processing. Resistance will result in immediate termination." Panic erupted throughout the bazaar. Etherians phased partially out of normal space, trying to escape. Clickings deployed their plasma rifles, the weapons humming to life with lethal energy. Zephyrians activated personal force fields that shimmered around them like soap bubbles. The lead Void Hunter raised its arm, revealing a weapon that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Organic curves merged seamlessly with technological components, and the barrel pulsed with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. It was an entropy cannon, capable of breaking down matter at the molecular level. "Observe the futility of your resistance," the Void Hunter announced, targeting a group of clicking traders who were trying to organize a defense. The entropy beam lanced out, washing over the clicking's plasma rifles. The advanced weapons simply ceased to exist, their complex energy matrices unraveling like smoke in a strong wind. The clickings themselves screamed as the edge of the beam caught them, their exoskeletons beginning to dissolve. Other station defenders opened fire with everything they had. Plasma bolts, quantum disruptors, neural scramblers, and gravity weapons all struck the Void Hunters with enough force to level city blocks. The pirates' adaptive armor absorbed every attack, their defensive systems analyzing and countering each new weapon type within seconds. "Your technology amuses us," laughed another Void Hunter as it methodically destroyed a Zephyrian squad. "We have faced these weapons for centuries. We have adapted to every energy signature, every particle beam, every exotic matter manipulation your species can produce." Sarah watched the slaughter unfold around her, her hand instinctively moving to her revolver's grip. She knew it was suicide. If the galaxy's most advanced weapons couldn't touch these creatures, what chance did an ancient human firearm have? But as she watched alien traders and station security personnel dissolve under the entropy beams, she realized someone had to try. The Void Hunters were herding civilians toward their ship's processing bays, and in minutes, hundreds of beings would face a fate worse than death. She drew the revolver slowly, hoping the movement wouldn't attract attention. The weapon felt heavy in her hand, its familiar weight both comforting and inadequate. Around her, the air still crackled with residual energy from the failed alien attacks. One of the Void Hunters noticed her drawing the weapon and actually paused in its advance. For a moment, the mechanical creature seemed confused by what it was seeing. "Primitive detected," it announced to its companions. "Chemical projectile weapon identified. Threat level, negligible." The other Void Hunters turned to look at Sarah, and she could hear what could only be described as laughter emerging from their vocal processors. It was a sound like metal grinding against metal, devoid of any warmth or humor. "A human with an antique," the lead Void Hunter observed. "How delightfully primitive." "We have not encountered chemical projectile weapons in over 200 years. Our records indicate they were abandoned by all civilized species due to their ineffectiveness against modern armor." Sarah raised the revolver, trying to steady her breathing as she aimed at the nearest Void Hunter. The creature made no effort to defend itself, apparently finding her threat so minimal as to be entertaining. "Please!" called out Vextar, the clicking trader who had mocked her earlier. He was pressed against a wall with a dozen other aliens, waiting for the Void Hunters to decide their fate. "Don't antagonize them," They'll kill us all if you resist. But Sarah had already made her decision. She had joined the merchant fleet to explore the galaxy, to be part of humanity's expansion into the stars. She hadn't come this far to watch helplessly as innocent beings were butchered. The Void Hunter closest to her spread its arms wide, its entropy cannon powering down as it prepared to demonstrate the futility of primitive weapons. Its adaptive armor began analyzing the revolver, preparing defenses against the expected chemical explosion and metal projectile. "Fire your weapon, Primitive," it taunted. "Show us the pinnacle of human military technology. We promise to preserve your death agonies for our entertainment archives." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. Around her, the bazaar had fallen silent except for the quiet sobbing of terrified civilians. Even the other Void Hunters had paused their advance, eager to witness what they clearly expected to be a moment of supreme irony. The revolver bucked in her hand with a sound like thunder. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the bazaar like a physical force, reverberating off the station's metal walls in a way that no energy weapon ever could. For creatures accustomed to the whisper-quiet hum of plasma rifles and the subtle vibrations of quantum disruptors, the sharp crack of chemical combustion was shocking in its primitive violence. The .357 round struck the Void Hunter center mass, punching through its adaptive armor like it wasn't even there. The creature staggered backward, looking down at the hole in its chest with what could only be described as confusion. Green fluid began to leak from the wound, pooling on the deck plates below. "Impossible!" the Void Hunter rasped, its voice distorting as internal systems began to fail. "Our armor adapts to all known projectile weapons. Chemical launchers cannot penetrate our defenses." But even as it spoke, the creature was dying. Its knees buckled and it crashed to the deck with a sound like falling machinery. The other two Void Hunters stared at their fallen companion, their sensor arrays blinking rapidly as they tried to process what had just occurred. Sarah looked at her revolver in amazement. She had expected the shot to accomplish nothing more than marking herself for immediate death. Instead, the most feared pirates in the galaxy were backing away from her like she held some kind of superweapon. "Analyze the projectile," ordered the lead Void Hunter, its voice carrying a note of uncertainty that had not been there before. "Determine how it bypassed our adaptive defenses." The second Void Hunter knelt beside its fallen comrade, extruding sensor probes that examined the wound. After a moment, it looked up with what Sarah somehow sensed was growing alarm. "The projectile appears to be a simple lead alloy propelled by chemical combustion," it reported. "Velocity approximately 400 meters per second. Kinetic energy transfer minimal by galactic standards. There should be no mechanism by which it could penetrate our armor." The lead Void Hunter turned its attention back to Sarah, raising its entropy cannon. But there was hesitation in its movements now, a careful deliberation that hadn't been present when it was casually slaughtering the other defenders. "You will explain this anomaly, human," it demanded. "What technology powers your weapon? What exotic matter manipulation allows such a primitive device to function?" Sarah almost laughed at the irony. Here were beings with technology beyond human comprehension, and they couldn't understand how a simple gun worked. She kept the revolver trained on the lead Void Hunter, though her hand was beginning to shake from adrenaline. "There's no exotic technology," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "It's just gunpowder and lead, same as it's been for hundreds of years." The Void Hunters exchanged glances, or at least their mechanical heads turned toward each other in what seemed like urgent communication. Around the bazaar, the alien traders and station security began to stir from their paralyzed terror, watching the standoff with growing hope. "You lie," the lead Void Hunter declared, but its certainty was wavering. "No primitive kinetic weapon could breach Void Hunter armor. We have fought every species in the galaxy. We have adapted to every weapon system ever deployed against us." That's when Sarah began to understand what was happening. The Void Hunter's adaptive armor was designed to counter the energy-based weapons that dominated galactic warfare. Plasma bolts, particle beams, quantum disruptors, gravity manipulators, all of these weapons followed principles that the pirates had encountered countless times over the centuries. But humans had taken a different path to the stars. While other species had abandoned kinetic weapons in favor of energy-based systems, humans had simply improved their projectile technology alongside their energy weapons. A .357 revolver might be primitive by galactic standards, but it was primitive in a way the Void Hunters had never encountered. "Your armor adapts to energy patterns and exotic matter interactions," Sarah said, the realization making her voice stronger. "But you've never had to deal with simple kinetic impact, have you? When was the last time someone shot at you with a chunk of metal moving fast enough to punch holes in things?" The lead Void Hunter's sensor array flickered rapidly, processing this new information. Around the bazaar, she could see other beings beginning to understand as well. Vextar, the clicking trader, was staring at her revolver with something approaching awe. "The humans never fully abandoned kinetic weapons," he whispered to his companions. "Their military still uses magnetic accelerators and chemical projectiles alongside their energy weapons. They're the only species that maintains such diverse armaments." The second Void Hunter suddenly straightened, its voice urgent as it addressed its leader. "Threat assessment revision required. The human weapon represents an unknown variable. We lack adequate defenses against primitive kinetic attack." For the first time in the encounter, the lead Void Hunter actually took a step backward. Its entropy cannon remained trained on Sarah, but she could see uncertainty in its posture. These creatures had terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years because they could adapt to any attack. Now they faced something their adaptive systems simply weren't designed to handle. "You have one functioning weapon," the lead Void Hunter said, trying to regain its commanding presence. "We can absorb that loss and complete our mission. Surrender now, and we will grant you a swift termination." But Sarah wasn't the only human on the station. As if summoned by the gunshot, other voices called out from around the bazaar. Captain Marcus Webb of the freighter. Determination stepped out from behind an overturned vendor stall, a military-issue assault rifle in his hands. From another direction came Chief Engineer Rosa Santos, carrying what looked like an antique shotgun. "Actually," Sarah said, finding herself smiling despite the mortal danger, "you're facing 7 armed humans, and we all brought kinetic weapons." The Void Hunters' heads swiveled as more humans emerged from cover throughout the bazaar. Captain Jennifer Liu carried a sniper rifle that gleamed with careful maintenance. Pilot Tommy Chin had a submachine gun slung across his chest. Even old Dr. A. Harrison had produced a hunting rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum. "This is impossible," the second Void Hunter said, its voice rising to something approaching panic. "Intelligence reports indicated humans had adopted standard galactic armaments. Chemical projectile weapons were listed as ceremonial only." Captain Webb laughed, a sound as shocking to alien ears as Sarah's gunshot had been. "Ceremonial? Son, you obviously haven't been paying attention to human military doctrine. We believe in redundancy." The Void Hunters were backing toward the bazaar's exit now, their earlier confidence completely shattered. Their adaptive armor could handle any energy weapon in the galaxy, but against a simple bullet, they were as vulnerable as any other creature. "Tactical withdrawal recommended," the lead Void Hunter announced to its companion. "We require time to develop countermeasures against primitive kinetic weapons." But they had waited too long to retreat. Station security, emboldened by the human success, began advancing from multiple directions. The Etherians phased back into normal space, their energy weapons crackling to life. The remaining clicking traders raised their plasma rifles with renewed purpose. "You want to know the funny thing about adaptive armor?" Sarah called out as she advanced, keeping her revolver trained on the lead Void Hunter. "It only works if you've encountered the threat before, but humans, we've been throwing rocks at things we don't like since before we discovered fire." The Void Hunter raised its entropy cannon, but hesitation made it slow. It had to choose between targeting Sarah or one of the other humans, and that moment of indecision cost it everything. 7 human weapons fired simultaneously, filling the air with thunder and smoke. The primitive chemical reactions that drove their bullets forward seemed almost quaint compared to the exotic energies crackling around the bazaar, but the results were undeniable. Both remaining Void Hunters collapsed, their adaptive armor useless against the storm of kinetic projectiles. Green fluid spread across the deck plates as their mechanical systems sparked and died. The bazaar fell silent except for the ringing echoes of gunfire. Then, slowly, the alien traders began to emerge from cover, staring at the fallen pirates with disbelief. "Impossible," whispered an Etherean merchant, its translucent features shimmering with amazement. "The Void Hunters have been unstoppable for 1,000 years. How did primitive chemical weapons accomplish what our most advanced technology could not?" Sarah reloaded her revolver with practiced efficiency, the simple mechanical actions feeling strange after witnessing such advanced combat. Around her, the other humans were checking their weapons and scanning for additional threats, with the calm professionalism of people who had never stopped preparing for the worst. "Sometimes," she said, holstering the weapon that had just changed everything, "the old ways work best." News of the incident spread through the galaxy like wildfire, transmitted through quantum communication networks and carried by merchant vessels to every corner of civilized space. Within hours, the story had reached the highest levels of the Galactic Confederation, sparking emergency sessions and heated debates in council chambers across dozens of worlds. The footage was everywhere. Security cameras had captured every moment of the confrontation, from the Void Hunters' confident arrival to their impossible defeat at the hands of primitive human weapons. The images of Sarah Chen standing over the fallen pirates with an antique revolver became the most transmitted data packet in galactic history. On the Etherean homeworld of Lumina, the High Council gathered in their crystalline chambers to review the recordings. The tall, translucent beings moved with fluid grace as they debated the implications of what they had witnessed. "The humans utilized kinetic projectile weapons," observed Councillor Veltar, her voice harmonizing with the quantum resonance of the chamber walls. "Such crude technology should not have been effective against Void Hunter adaptive systems." "Yet it was," replied Elder Zephyron, his ancient form shimmering with accumulated wisdom. "We must consider the possibility that our advancement beyond kinetic weapons was premature. The humans retained these capabilities while we discarded them as obsolete." Similar discussions were taking place throughout the galaxy. The Clicking Collective buzzed with frantic analysis as their military strategists tried to understand how chemical combustion had succeeded where plasma weapons failed. The Zephyrian Defense Corps immediately began requisitioning kinetic weapon designs from human sources, much to their embarrassment. But nowhere was the impact more profound than aboard the Galactic Confederation flagship Harmony, where Admiral Kex Andra of the Thurian Space Navy was conducting an emergency briefing for the military high command. "The Void Hunter threat has persisted for over a millennium," the silver-furred admiral rumbled, her amber eyes reflecting the holographic displays around the conference room. "In that time, they have adapted to every weapon system we have deployed against them. Every energy signature, every exotic matter manipulation, every quantum field disruption has been absorbed and countered by their technology." The assembled officers, representing 24 species, listened with growing unease. The Void Hunters had been the galaxy's greatest fear for so long that many civilizations had simply accepted their existence as an unavoidable fact of life. The human solution was elegant in its simplicity, Admiral Kexandra continued. They never abandoned kinetic weapons. While we pursued ever more sophisticated energy-based systems, humanity maintained a parallel development of projectile technology. They threw rocks, and the rocks worked. Captain Zorthak of the Clicking Fleet chittered his objection. With respect, Admiral, chemical projectile weapons are primitive. Our plasma rifles deliver far more energy per shot than any kinetic system. And yet, the Admiral replied, gesturing to the tactical display, your plasma rifles were useless against Void Hunter armor. The humans' primitive weapons cut through it like it wasn't there. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Every species present had contributed to the Confederation's military might through their advanced technologies. The idea that simple kinetic weapons could outperform their sophisticated systems challenged everything they believed about technological progress. On Earth, Captain Sarah Chen found herself at the center of a media storm, unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. Galactic news networks competed for interviews, and diplomatic representatives from dozens of worlds requested meetings to discuss human military technology. She sat in the office of Admiral Rebecca Torres at Luna Command, watching through the viewport as ships from across the galaxy arrived to observe human weapons demonstrations. The sight was surreal. Crystalline Etherian cruisers hovering alongside biomechanical Zephyrian vessels, all waiting to see humanity's primitive firearms in action. This is insane, Sarah muttered, shaking her head as another alien delegation's ship appeared in the distance. 6 months ago they were calling us backwards primitives. Now they want to license our gun technology. Admiral Torres, a veteran of the human expansion into space, smiled grimly. Welcome to galactic politics, Captain. Nothing changes alien minds quite like effectiveness. The demonstration that followed was witnessed by representatives from 47 different species. On the Luna firing range, human soldiers showcased everything from antique revolvers to modern magnetic accelerators. Each weapon fired simple projectiles driven by chemical or magnetic force, and each one punched through Void Hunter armor samples with ease. The alien observers were particularly fascinated by the older weapons. A clicking military attaché spent an hour examining a World War II-era rifle, unable to comprehend how such crude engineering could be so devastatingly effective. The principle is unchanged, explained Sergeant Maria Rodriguez as she demonstrated the bolt-action mechanism. Whether it's gunpowder pushing lead or magnetic fields accelerating tungsten, we're still just throwing things very fast at whatever we want to break. The technical briefings that followed revolutionized galactic military thinking. For the first time in centuries, weapons researchers began investigating kinetic systems. The Etherians, masters of energy manipulation, struggled to understand how simple mass and velocity could be more effective than their sophisticated plasma arrays. Dr. Elizabeth Parker, Earth's leading ballistics expert, found herself explaining basic physics to beings whose civilizations had mastered faster-than-light travel. The Void Hunter's adaptive armor works by analyzing incoming energy patterns and developing countermeasures, she explained to a packed auditorium. But kinetic weapons don't have energy patterns to analyze. They're just chunks of matter moving really fast. The armor can't adapt to being physically punched through. The implications extended far beyond military applications. Trade delegations arrived daily, seeking access to human manufacturing techniques. The Zephyrians wanted to license magnetic accelerator technology. The Clickings offered partnership agreements for ammunition production. Even the proud Etherians submitted formal requests for joint research projects. But the most significant changes came from the Confederation military itself. Within weeks, new protocols were distributed to every fleet in galactic space. Ships were required to carry kinetic weapons as backup systems. Emergency production facilities began manufacturing simple projectile weapons based on human designs. The irony was not lost on humanity. For 50 years, they had struggled to prove themselves worthy of galactic civilization. They had adopted alien technologies, learned alien customs, and tried desperately to fit into a universe that saw them as primitive newcomers. Now, their supposed primitiveness had become their greatest strength. Captain Sarah Chen returned to her regular cargo runs, but her ship was no longer viewed as an ancient relic. The Persistence was now seen as a symbol of human ingenuity, its crew treated with respect at every port. Her old revolver had become famous throughout the galaxy, though she still wore it for the same practical reasons as always. At the Galactic Trade Station where it all began, a monument had been erected commemorating the defeat of the Void Hunters. It featured a simple metal plaque with an inscription in dozens of languages. Sometimes the old ways work best. Vextar, the clicking trader who had mocked Sarah's weapon, now operated a booth selling human-manufactured ammunition. Business was booming as species throughout the galaxy sought to equip their ships with kinetic backup weapons. "I don't understand it," he admitted to Sarah during one of her visits. "How did we become so focused on energy weapons that we forgot about throwing things?" Sarah smiled, patting the revolver at her hip. "You didn't forget. You just never needed to remember until now." The Void Hunter threat, once considered unstoppable, began to crumble across the galaxy. Without their adaptive advantage, the pirates found themselves vulnerable to any species that could acquire kinetic weapons. Within months, their 1,000-year reign of terror was effectively ended. But perhaps the most important change was in how humanity was perceived by the galactic community. No longer were humans seen as primitive newcomers who had stumbled into space by accident. They were recognized as a species that approached problems differently, one that retained capabilities others had discarded. The human concept of technological redundancy spread throughout Confederation space. Species that had pursued single paths of advancement began diversifying their approaches. The galaxy became more resilient, more adaptable, and, ironically, more primitive. At a state dinner on the Thurian homeworld, Admiral Kexandra raised her glass in a toast to the human delegation. "To our human allies," she rumbled in her deep voice, "who reminded us that progress is not always about moving forward. Sometimes it is about remembering what worked." Sarah Chen, now wearing the dress uniform of a Confederation hero, raised her glass in return. Around her, representatives from dozens of worlds echoed the toast, their diverse voices creating a harmony that would have been impossible before a simple gunshot changed everything. "To throwing rocks," she replied with a grin, "and to those brave enough to throw them." The laughter that followed echoed through the grand hall, carried by beings who had learned that sometimes the most advanced solution was the one their ancestors had used all along. In a galaxy obsessed with progress, humanity had achieved their greatest victory by refusing to abandon their past. The old ways, as it turned out, worked best of all.